Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Matthew, for that introduction. As Matthew has said, my name's Sarah Haywood. I'm the Chief Exec of MedCity, and we are delighted to welcome you here today. I like to think of the biomedical research centres as the engine rooms for translational medicine. And an event like this would not really make any sense if we didn't start to look at some of the issues and some of the challenges, but also some of the experiences and successes in moving the research, the fantastic research which is taking place within our academic institutions through into the clinic and towards commercialisation. And Matthew, thank you for your presentation, which has fantastically set the scene for the discussion that we're going to have over the next hour. We're not alone in the UK or indeed in Europe in having a real focus on advanced therapies. And I would just like to welcome MedCity's dear friend, Setsuo Morishita, to the event today. Morishita-san is from the Japanese Bioindustry Association. And over the last 3 years, we as MedCity have been forming an increasingly strong relationship with the JBA and with the Japanese ecosystem. And for those of you, I will do an early plug, but in October of this year, we will be taking another mission out to the Bio Japan conference, which has a very strong focus on regenerative medicine and provides a fantastic opportunity in a holistic way for academia and industry collectively to join up. So if any of you are interested in finding out more about that, please do call me later or talk to one of my MedCity colleagues about that. However, what we're going to do now is we're going to look at some specific examples from across the region of different institutions' experiences in terms of translating their research towards commercialization. And then have a discussion which I hope you will all actively participate in at the end around some of these issues that we're facing. So if I can please ask my panelists to come and join me on the stage. And you will notice that, unfortunately, the men didn't get the memo about wearing red, but well done, Matthew, for putting on a red tie. I'm delighted to welcome to the stage Professor Emma Morris from UCL Partners, Professor Bobby Gaspar, who, for the purposes of today's discussion, is wearing his hat as Chief Scientific Officer for Orchard Therapeutics, Professor Ludovic Mazur from the Wellcome Sanger Institute, Dr. Jim Faulkner, who is the Senior Vice President at Autolus, and of course Matthew, who you've already heard from. And what I'm going to do is to ask my colleagues to each give a short reflection over 5 minutes on their experiences, setting the scene from their own perspective, and then we will move on to discussion. So, Emma, are you happy to kick us off, please?
Okay. So I'm a clinical academic. I am Professor of Clinical Cell and Gene Therapy at UCL, and I'm a consultant hematologist with a background in allogeneic bone marrow transplant and cell and gene therapy, both for patients with blood cancers, but also patients with inherited immune deficiencies more recently. I have my own research program that is involved in developing new T-cell therapies with genetically engineered T-cells, and that's a group of scientists who work from mouse models through to clinical the development of clinical grade products. And as part of that, I lead a number of first-in-man and phase 1 clinical trials with gene-engineered T-cells. And I've been very fortunate to have had a very successful collaboration with Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult and a number of those products have gone through various phases of commercialization and are now sitting with Cell Medica's portfolio. So I've been involved from the basic science through to the clinical delivery, running and setting up phase 1 trials through to the commercialization of a product. The other important hat I wear is that I'm one of the research theme directors for the UCL-UCLH Biomedical Research Centre, and I'm responsible for one of the 4 main themes of the UCLH BRC, which focuses on immunotherapeutics, immunity, inflammation, and infection. And a large part of the cell and gene therapy portfolio sits within that research theme. I'm also chairing the UCL-wide Cell and Gene Therapy Therapeutic Innovation Network and set up a regulatory committee to assess the gene therapy approvals for clinical trials activity across UCL. So I guess I'm pretty embedded in the field, and have more recently, one of the really exciting things has been taking some of the exciting gene therapy approaches to rare inherited diseases in children that Bobby and Adrian Thrasher and his colleagues at Great Ormond Street have developed, and translating that into adults. And we've now done 2 world-first treatments of adults, which one of them has recently been published. And it's really exciting to be working together, and that's 2 BRCs working together. And I guess the diffusion bit of your slide, is not just moving from very specialist centres out, but it's moving applications from one disease or from one patient group to another. And we can only really do that by working very collaboratively. So that's enough from me.
Great, thank you. So you've teed it up nicely for Bobby. Bobby, welcome, who's come straight from Heathrow. So thank you very much for being here with us today. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences?
Yeah, so I started off as a junior doctor at Great Ormond Street, looking after patients with, primary immunodeficiencies, very rare conditions. And at the time, this was back in 92, I think I was I started at Great Ormond Street. And at the time, transplantation, bone marrow transplantation, was really the only therapeutic option for these individuals. And we used to lose half the children at that time. Things have improved since. But this was a kind of a nascent era of gene therapy, and there were some early studies that were going on. And we got involved, I got involved very early on at that stage and was involved in the first gene therapy study in the UK for any disease. And went into the lab and then met Adrian Thrasher, and the 2 of us have built up a program of gene therapy at Great Ormond Street and UCL. And so we treated our first patient having developed the therapies in the lab in 2001. That was the second trial worldwide to show that gene therapy could correct any monogenic disease, and attracted quite a lot of attention at that time. Using that expertise, we then built a series of different clinical trials for a number of different immune deficiencies. We weathered the storms of leukemogenesis that happened with the first generation of vectors, went back to design new lentiviral vectors that then went into another wave of clinical trials. At this time, it was still a very, very early phase with a few groups academically working on this for these. This was hematopoietic stem cell gene therapy rather than T-cell gene therapy for monogenic diseases. And it was only latterly that as these lentiviral vector studies were being trialed in patients and actually showing robust, sustained correction of the immune system, that it became noticed by the industry and by commercial partners that these could be taken forward to be viable genetic medicines. And actually, having never thought that this would have any kind of commercial value, we were suddenly faced with the prospect that we'd done a trial where all the patients survived. We had 95+% efficacy, and really to try and move this towards being a genetic medicine. And in order to be able to do that, we needed a commercial partner. There were opportunities actually at that stage to license it out to larger companies. But also we had conversations with venture capitalists about actually forming our own company in order to be able to take not just one or two of these assets, but to bring together a portfolio of different stem cell gene therapy applications, and then to form a company with a portfolio of potential products into the future. And so 2 years ago, we launched Orchard Therapeutics. So that was funded by venture capitalists from the US, and I think it was 20 million pounds or so that they put into that at the beginning. Because the lead program was one that I developed, I took on a role as CSO, Chief Scientific Officer of the company on a consultancy basis for a year or so. But things have really kind of developed, and the company's grown. I think it's got base now in London and in San Francisco, where it has both offices and laboratories. Last year, it raised $110 million of Series B funding to take it through to the next stage. And I've just come from Boston to where I've been talking to a lot of investors about the next stage of capitalization for the company to take it to the next stage. And the aim is to build a company that will bring these transformative genetic medicines to patients with rare diseases. And hopefully later this year, we'll file with the FDA for the program that we developed academically back in 2000. I think we drew the plasmid in 2007, took it through the various different stages of application and treat the first patient in 2012, and hopefully we'll be filing later this year. So I've kind of walked the entire path, as it were, so far anyway.
Great, thank you. Ludovic, could I turn to you?
So I'm Ludovic Mazur. I come from Cambridge. I'm professor of genetic medicine in the Cambridge Stem Cell Institute, and I have a joint position with the Wellcome Trust Sanger Institute. And I'm also a team lead of the NIHR BRC Transplant and Regenerative Medicine, which was mentioned earlier. And the goal of this team in Cambridge is to basically improve organ transplantation and also improve immunosuppressive treatment, which is an important part of cell-based therapy, of course, and also explore the possibility to use cell-based therapy for a diversity of application. We have, for example, Roger Barker with Parkinson. We have Cedric Gavert with megakaryocyte therapies. And my own group is interested, in fact, to develop new cell-based therapy against liver disease. So for the past 10 years, we have been working on human pluripotent stem cells and develop protocol to generate cell type with a clinical interest, either for gut, liver, lung, and pancreas. And one of our more advanced cell products in the context of regenerative medicine is for liver. And basically, our goal is to develop cells that we can transplant and correct metabolic disorders that induce liver failure. So during this process, we have also created a company that allows us to basically sell those cells for in vitro application, which is called Definigen. So we've been through the whole process of raising money, of developing products, industrialization of the cell process to produce large-scale quantity of those cells, and also, of course, quality control at the standard of the industry. Now we are entering a new phase where we basically want to transfer this knowledge we have developed for in vitro application for clinical application, because we thought that through this path we have reached a level of interest, confidence that we can move those cells into patient. And for that, we have created a small team with the business part led by Marcus Yeo, which is currently the CEO of Definigen, with a group of clinicians also, and especially including Tamir Rashid, which is based at King's, and also myself in terms of basic science and developing cell type with full functionality for cell-based therapy. And the process we are currently in is basically we're raising money to create this new company. We are at the seed fund stage discussing with Cambridge, but also other financial institutions, and also a super business angel, which have been extremely supportive the past few years with Definigen. And we are really in this process of creating the team, starting the regulatory process, discussing with Catapult to start the preclinical work, and also looking into all the GMP production, cell-based production that we want to achieve in the next couple of years. So that's where we are right now.
Great, thank you. Jim, can I turn to you in the Autolus story?
Very happy to. So my name's Jim Faulkner. I'm currently head of what's called product delivery at Autolus, which I'll explain a little bit about. And specifically, product delivery encompasses process development, manufacturing, GMP manufacturing, clinical supply, and so on. And so my background is I'm not a clinician by training. I'm a PhD molecular biologist. That's way back when. But perhaps more pertinently, my sort of personal journey over the last 3 years or so has been around Autolus and the setup and commercialization, ultimately, of advanced therapies within London. So my personal journey is, in a way, very reflective of what we're trying to talk about today. So I'll just take a moment and I'll describe it in that way. 3 years ago, I was part of GSK. And I was heading up the manufacturing and supply for their rare diseases unit. I was very happy at GSK. I'd had a good career there. But what the most interesting product portfolio that we had within the rare diseases unit, in my view, was the hematopoietic stem cell gene therapy programs that GSK had collaborated with a group in Milan, a very similar technology to what Bobby's company has been working on. It's terrific technology. As we've talked about, the efficacy levels are extremely high. And GSK had taken on this program to register it and commercialize it. And what was interesting, I have nothing good things to say about GSK as a company, but one thing it's not is a gene therapy company. It's a very large pharma company, and nearly all the processes and setup of that company are designed for things which are not gene therapy. You know, it's whether it be asthma inhalers, whether it be pills, whether it be monoclonal antibodies. And what was becoming increasingly clear to me was that trying to develop products that required a completely different paradigm around the way that you develop things clinically, manufacturing, preclinically, just about every area of it, even looking at the commercialization model, was very hard within a framework which was set up for something completely different. And I was getting quite frustrated. And I then had the opportunity, had a call from Syncona, who are the investment arm of the Wellcome Trust, about a company that they were trying to birth out of UCL, looking at genetically engineered T cells. And they were interested in my skills in understanding autologous manufacturing and everything around that supply chain. And I went down to talk to them, and it was like, I thought, yes, we can design something that's fit for purpose, that is actually taking a blank piece of paper and actually designing things in a way that actually creates a new company and a new paradigm. It was very attractive, and I suspect that's why you decided to do Orchard rather than partner with a large farm, because you want to do things differently. You need that very different innovation. So I took the plunge. A lot of people said I was bonkers, but actually it's been a great journey so far. But what I think back to that sort of period 3 years ago was there was just, I think I was employee number 4, and I was sitting in a small rental office in Tottenham Court Road, and we had a few decisions to make. We had some decisions about where we were going to locate the company and how we were going to move it forward. And when we thought about what was important, because we could have gone to the north of England, we could have gone to Wales or something. It would have certainly been a lot cheaper. It would have certainly been more picturesque. But yeah, if you've ever been to White City, you'll know what I'm talking about. But actually, what was important to us was the skills that we were going to need. That's the fundamental, and we can probably explore that a bit deeper. But also the infrastructure that we were going to need as a startup company to really get going. And it became very obvious to us that London, in particular, was where we wanted to be, and we took the plunge to set up within London. we would, Autolus is a spin-out from UCL, so we had close links with that university and that infrastructure. But one of the first things that I did was to go and think about how was I going to progress anything. I jumped from a large pharma company with all the support network that I had to a complete startup with no support structure at all. And my first journeys were down to Great Ormond Street to see the team at ICH, to see Adrian and Wasim and so on, to King's College to see Farzin about viral vector, to Royal Free to talk to people like Mark Laudel about the centre that he had here, because what we were very able to do was to leverage that BRC infrastructure that we've talked about, that was able to move us forward into our initial clinical trials. And without that, we would have fallen flat on our face and looked rather foolish. And then ultimately, once we'd got going into clinical trials and looking further on at commercial, as Matthew alluded to, we've signed on the dotted line and are part of the Catapult Manufacturing Centre. So Autolus has grown from 4 people to 130 odd today. It'll be 200 by the end of the year. Very rapid growth. We're in 3 different clinical trials, soon to be 4 in the next couple of months. And we've raised a lot of money, but one thing I'm perversely proud about is that not a single penny of that investment money has been spent on bricks and mortar. We so far have got this far and continue to progress very well by using that infrastructure that's available to us, and it's been invaluable in beginning our commercial journey. And I think we can be very proud of what we've got, and I think it's world class. So I'll leave at that point.
Jim, you've teed us up very nicely for a few discussion topics and questions there. But Matthew, if I can finally turn to you, you've obviously kind of given us a comprehensive overview of the Catapult and the work that you're doing. So maybe you'd like to kind of reflect on one of those issues that has come up, and perhaps I could ask you to reflect on that interplay between big pharma and small companies, and the model that obviously has been favoured across the panel here, which is around spin-out commercialisation into smaller ventures. I would imagine through the Catapult, you've got the experience of working with large and small. So perhaps I could ask you to reflect a little bit on those issues.
Yeah, I mean, we do work with large and small companies throughout the world, actually, but with a UK focus. I think the jury is out as to what the long-term business model for this industry looks like. I think there could be a number of successful solutions. I know that Jim's company is more forward-thinking than many that I see in terms of looking at the way they develop their approach, and I think it's got a very high chance of very strong success. And that's the sort of, well, soon not to be an SME, but of a medium-sized company, I suppose, powering forwards. The large companies are taking multiple different approaches. Some of them are just going too complicated. Some of them are going, yeah, let's just get a head start, we'll buy. I mean, we've seen some enormous multi-billion pound transactions of people buying companies like Juno. And that's just a way of getting them in there. And then some of the companies, particularly in the gene therapy field, are trying to do it themselves. They're trying to be as nimble as a small company. I don't think it's easy for them to do that. I think there's all the things that large companies have as problems that get in the way. And I think in an industry that has to move extremely quickly, if I was to choose to go into pursuing one of the therapeutics as opposed to helping companies pursue the therapeutics, which is what we do at the moment, I would be favouring the smaller companies. I think that they have that ability to make decisions quickly. They have the ability to assess information very, very quickly. And blowing our own trumpet, in the UK, they also have access to infrastructure that if they didn't have access to, they would struggle a bit. We've been involved with, an example that actually came up on the board earlier on. Takeda made a large investment in gamma delta therapeutics. one of the things that Takeda were reasonably public about when they did that was that they came and did due diligence on the cell and gene therapy catapult to see that this small company that at that time was a handful of people had access to all sorts of different infrastructure that it needed to grow. And I think we've kind of got in the UK a fantastic commitment from the UK government that's provided a very positive environment.
Great, thank you. So perhaps Ludovic and then Bobby, I could ask you on this question of the interplay between large industry and small, and recognising that within the audience here we've got representatives from both. You both decided to go down the route of spinning out a company. Can I ask you, did you have Big Pharma kind of knocking at your door, trying to get you to license your IP into them, or have you been blazing such a trail that actually they're now kind of running to catch up with what you're doing? Ludovic?
So for the in vitro application, yes, but for the cell-based therapy, it's much more complicated because there is clearly a much bigger risk that the bigger company are struggling to manage. And so that means that basically we choose the spin-out company because that was the solution to develop that with a lot of speed, a lot of independence, and without those kind of consideration around risk that were systematically limiting our discussion with bigger companies. And I think also, ultimately the model, there's a new model, a therapeutic model to develop. And some of the pharma are struggling to see, what is going to be this model. Whereas for a spin-out company, basically, we are free to define and develop this model as much as we want.
Okay, Bobby.
Yeah, so when, this is about 3.5 years ago now, when there was attention about the clinical programs that we developed, the results were very good. We talked to a lot of people. So this was facilitated a lot by UCLB, so the tech transfer arm of UCL, and we were either approached directly or people were guided to us by UCLB, and so we talked to a lot of VCs, other biotechs, and also large pharma as well. And then it came down actually to a choice between two, either licensing it to a large pharma company or going with taking a shot in the dark, as it were, and spinning out and setting up our own company. And so there was a lot of discussion over, and competing, competing kind of attractions, etc. And in the end, actually, so it was Adrian Thrasher and myself, and we sat down and we thought, well, if this went to a large pharma company, how much influence would we have in making this happen? Because with all the governance that is around that, the decision making would be much slower. The priorities would be different given the big, large public companies, and so and actually we felt very strongly that what we were doing had the opportunity to be really important and really become genetic medicines that could, because we'd already seen it, that could offer long-term correction for these conditions, and felt very strongly that we wanted to be involved in making it happen, and we didn't want to lose that influence. And we had a very strong vision about what we wanted to bring into the company and the kind of indications that we were interested in. And I don't think that had it been licensed into somewhere else, into a larger company, that we would have been able to share that vision, or that would have been listened to. And so it was really on that basis that we decided to go to form Orchard, and to have that initial funding from the VCs and to set that up. And as Jim says, it's a very exciting ride. I used to go. We had offices in St. Paul's, which had room for 3 people, and I'd go there on my consultancy day and sit in a room with one other person and talk about what we were doing, and to see that then kind of just and people were attracted to come to the company. There were people also left very, as Jim has done for Autolus, left very good roles in large companies to work for this much smaller company, because I think they've shared the same view that within that smaller company you could be that much more agile, you could make decisions quickly, you could follow a path that you all agreed upon. And so to have like-minded people to join the company and to watch it grow it's been extremely rewarding.
And of course you've both benefited from the support, and Ludovic, you alluded to as well, the issue of fundraising. I'm not going to go into the issue of VC and funding, because I don't think we've really got time to touch on that today, although it's an interesting topic. What I'd like to turn to is the question of skills and the important role that infrastructure that's provided by the NIHR and through Innovate UK can play in skills development. There is, of course, a balance to be struck between retaining skills within the experimental medicine infrastructure between academia and the NHS, and also the demand from industry. Emma, I wondered if you could kind of reflect a little bit on the role that the BRCs play in skills development and where you see that going over the next period of the BRC licence.
Okay, yeah. I think Jim, you touched on this, one of the really key things that we have to continuously stress, and I'm not just saying this because Louise is here from NIHR, but actually a huge amount of this just wouldn't happen without NIHR commitment to experimental medicine and to the BRCs. Because what they fund in a number of our biomedical research centres are senior technicians working in manufacturing, GMP, production, genetic engineering of cells, process development scientists. These are really pretty niche roles, which, you know, your average NHS trust won't have members of staff to deliver these kind of approaches. So they are positions that have evolved organically from research groups based in universities, working alongside clinical teams, making clinical grade products. And of course, these have all begun from very small scale projects that have happened initially with Research Council kind of funding in an academic group in a university attached to a hospital, and been moved through the early stage preclinical development. And actually the posts that have made all this happen have been funded either by the universities, by research councils, or by the NIHR through the BRCs, particularly with its focus on experimental medicine. And more so through the last 5 years of the BRC, and particularly this current term of the BRC that we're 1 year into of a 5-year duration, that we're moving from the very experimental into delivery into patients and demonstrating impact in patients. And I'm not talking about phase 3 randomized trials, but actually delivering impact in patients in a number of different centres in the UK. And most of the spin-out companies have relied on our infrastructure to be able to do that, whether it's making vector, whether it's manufacturing cells, whether it's using our cohorts of patients, our clinical staff, our nursing staff, our actual physical infrastructure, bed space, pharmacy, whatever. And so I think we have to always recognise the commitment that the government, the NHS, the NIHR and HEFC through the universities have made to facilitate this. And it's why I think that the UK and, you know, this golden triangle is a really accessible place to make these things happen, because that's all coordinated. It's not like, I guess, in the US where you have standalone big massive institutions that are completely separate from other institutions. We have already embedded a linked up coordinated centre. We are really struggling with retaining staff, experienced, skilled staff within the NHS and within academia, because they're all being offered more money in these wonderful spin-out companies. So we are the victims of our own success. And we just have to keep training more people. Fortunately, it's a really exciting field, and your young scientists want to get into it. They want to be involved. There's a real buzz about it. But I think we need to think about training opportunities and pathways for clinical scientists very specifically in cell and gene therapy fields.
Can I just echo what Emma said? I mean, all the stuff that we did and, in the trials then went into companies. I mean, that a huge amount of that, and there was project funding from the research councils, Wellcome Trust, but the kind of the glue that held it all together was the BRC funding. So, as Emma says, so trial coordinators, the technicians in the lab, nurses taking part in the clinical trials. A huge amount of that funding came from the BRC, and we couldn't have done it otherwise. And you can't get all of that infrastructure through those trial grants. That will fund a little bit of it, but it won't fund all the people that are required to perform the function that makes a successful trial. So it was hugely important.
Jim, your reflections from within a company.
I think skills is, for me, and not just for me, when we did a brief industry survey about what we saw as the bottlenecks and, if you like, threats and opportunities and stuff, the number one issue that small companies have who similar to Autolus were around skills, access to the right people, because that's so fundamental to your success. And what I would say is that we're doing okay, but we mustn't be complacent, because things will change. They'll change in both in scale and in the skills mix that we require going forward as that curve goes, that hockey stick goes up. And what we do in the UK, and what we do very well in the Golden Triangle, is academic expertise. We have some fantastic world-leading universities, obviously. And the young people that are coming out of those universities, not just UK citizens, should I say, many of them are coming from other parts of the world and making London and the Golden Triangle their home. A lot of people that we have at Autolus are not from the UK. In fact, less than 50% are UK nationals. And that's been great so far, I think, for where we are with, all the molecular biologists, the immunologists and so on is great. But I think where I would say is that the skills mix that we're going to need going forward is not just those academics. They will continue to be required, and those clinical scientists, but there are going to be other skills around, yes, manufacturing, that's close to my heart, but also IT, but also logistics, but also commercialization and so on. And what we have to ensure is that there are pathways for people who are either in existing professions that need to be reskilled, or for those people who have somehow missed the boat, if you like, in terms of academic, conventional, school, university, and so on. So we need to think about apprenticeships. We need to think about professional education and so on, and all different types of ways of upskilling the workforce in order to be ready for that challenge. And I think as an industry, we need to think quite creatively about how we're going to help do that, because what we do now, we need to keep doing, but we need to add more layers to that as well. And I think it's really important. Otherwise, what will happen is to go to the monoclonal antibody industry, discovered in the UK, in the Golden Triangle, fantastic research companies that span out on that. To my knowledge, not a single major commercial antibody is manufactured in the UK. And so all that value stream that started in the UK has gone to Singapore, Korea, US, obviously, and even other parts of Europe. And we missed that. And as an economy and as a community, we can't afford to do that again with advanced therapies.
So some very interesting comments. It behoves us all collectively to think creatively about how we can address that issue, particularly given the context of the UK's life sciences industrial strategy, which has a very strong focus on skills. Before I throw open to questions from the floor, I just wanted to pick up one other issue and in a sense going back to some of the comments from Simon in his introduction to today, where he flagged that in some of the work that we're doing in London, we're thinking about how the role of IP professionals fits in to this pathway early on. And I think that certainly from my experience within MedCity, there can be perceptions at times that projects that are taken forward within the academic setting do not always have the right IP strategies in place, the right thinking to support commercialization in a smooth and timely way. And clearly that often academic projects will look at an issue in the round and look at many different issues, but perhaps that conflicts sometimes with the pathway that industry might be looking for in terms of the critical pathway for moving towards commercialization. So the BRCs are at the heart of squaring that circle, because your focus is very much on translation and with an eye to ensuring that these products find their way to patients. So I wonder whether Ludovic and then Matthew, I might ask you to reflect a little bit on how that balancing between academic programs versus those that are translating into commercial is taken forward and balanced across both the work of the BRCs but also the catapult. So Ludovic.
So yeah, we are extremely aware of IP and patenting and this question, and we work in a close relationship with the NIHR BRC, the Cambridge Enterprise, with the structure in Cambridge that manage most of our IP, and we have in fact submitted 7 patents in the past 10 years, and systematically know that when we have a new discovery in the lab, we go through this process. So we're really aware of all the technical aspects. And I think the key question often that come back in terms of academic versus industry is the freedom to operate for the academic. And I think there's a very good balance now on that. It's not exclusive to be able to patent your research and at the same time to continue your academic development, collaboration, and that this balance now is extremely good. So clearly, I think it's a question again of probably education and experience. When you have access to people that have been going through this process that can reassure you that it's not blocking you to develop academic program, I think the path to IP is very straightforward. After the planning for industry, from my personal experience, it's never been a big problem, because basically there's always a consensus in terms of using this IP to produce added value. And from that, there's always agreement and basically deal that can be put in place to exploit this IP to reach this objective. So in the context of the NIHR and Cambridge and most of the institutions we've been dealing with, it's a very straightforward process. And that is centralized to really produce added value on the research we're doing, which is very positive.
Matthew.
Obviously, to some extent, the whole catapult is about that concept. But if I was to focus on one area, what I would say is as early as you reasonably can, and I'll come back to when I think the reasonably is, you should be thinking about developing a target product profile. It's a design exercise. It's a good discipline. And it doesn't have to be a tight document. It can just be a loose document that says roughly, and we're targeting this, we're going to do this. We need these things to make it happen. We need this kind of evidence to make it work. And in order for it to be a thriving product, we need this kind of defensibility through the patent, and that's all built into that. And if you start at a very early stage to put that document together, it provides some discipline. It provides a design exercise. I stood up in front of an audience 5 years ago, and there were 2 of us in what must have been 200 speeches, he talked about target product profiles. Nowadays, when you go to conferences in our translational space, everybody stands up and says, target product profile. This is what gives you the discipline to focus your resources and avoid wasting resources. The amount of times that you can see companies that have failed in the early years of I'll give you one very quick example. I went to visit a company in the US who'd spent $500 million developing their product, taking it into clinical trial. They were selling it for roughly $100,000 a dose, 3 doses. And I sat down in front of them and I talked about the target product profile and the design process and making sure that your IP fits with your product. It's not just a case of having a bit of IP, it needs to fit with what you're trying to do. And they looked at me and went, that's an engineering approach, isn't it? We wish we'd done that. Because actually what they'd done is they'd gone into clinical trial with a product that had 3 doses essentially in there. And there wasn't evidence that 3 doses were actually necessary. And if they'd been able to do it with 2 doses, and they developed the evidence to suggest that it could be done with 2 doses, their product would have been very economically viable. But with 3 doses, it wasn't. They still exist today, but they weren't the massive success story that they should have been. So I would encourage that discipline. Now, when? I think when you start to get your research into, you're thinking about putting it into animals, that's the point that you're starting to develop a product, when you're thinking about putting it to that stage.
Great. Emma?
I'd just like to highlight an issue which, and I agree with you completely, and the ultimate aim of all of this research and this activity is to produce a therapeutic product that will help treat disease in patients and be accessible to lots of people. So the thing that slightly rubs up against that is the kind of continuous infrastructure from academic research into commercialization. And it is difficult to manage that early phase where, for example, if you're running a university research lab where a lot of the academic proof of principle is being developed, which is feeding into this pipeline, into this whole area of cell and gene therapy, that there will be PhD students, there will be postdocs who need to have publications to secure their academic careers. People will want to go and present their findings at meetings. And the earlier the IP package is put around a potential idea and a product, the better it is for subsequent commercialization. We don't run into problems with freedom to operate. I mean, we've had all sorts of issues over the years together with various products, and it's complicated. But I'm just flagging that up because I think it's something that there's a bit of a rub there. And I don't know whether we can avoid that, but we do, from whichever part of the Venn diagram we're sitting in, we have to be aware of that, I think.
Bobby?
No, I completely agree with that tension, but I think it's a cultural thing. We just don't have that, that cultural impetus in the UK to put protection around our ideas.
Yes, it's changing.
It is changing, but we're quite a long way behind. And as academics, we, especially in the UK, we want to publish, we want to get it out there, we want to disseminate. We don't want to first protect, then disseminate. Yes. And that's a cultural change that needs to happen because it doesn't. It doesn't favour the commercialization because when the company comes to you, one of the first questions they ask is, "What's your IP? What freedom to operate do you have?" And often we say, "Well, actually, there isn't anything." But if you go to the US, it's very, very different. The IP is part and parcel of what they do. And if you look at the CVs of many academics in the US, they have a string of patents. In this, and it's actually a necessity to have that as part of your academic career, where it isn't the same here.
So and maybe the ref should include patents.
It should, and in fact, it's one of the metrics I think that is part of, and actually the BRCs can help with that because the BRCs can use IP and patents as a metric to be judged against. Because if you're doing all of this and you can't actually you don't have the freedom to operate, to move it into that translational commercial phase, then you're failing in your duty. So it should be something that we do. And I think it requires BRCs and the universities to put in place expertise that facilitate that. And unfortunately, I think that's one of the things that you talk about, because if it takes too long to get your IP sorted out, then there is that tension about wanting to present and publish. But if the machine is good at sorting that out, then it should be a relatively seamless path.
Great.
Go on, just-
Matthew,
I mean,
please
I
do.
completely agree with Emma. Both of you, actually. This IP story is a very delicate one. The IP needs to be there, but we had an IP metric imposed upon us, and that could have led to us going out and patenting everything that moved, and that just makes the situation worse. So I hope that there will be an initiative within the system to look at how IP works within the system. We spend enormous amounts of money trawling through lots of unnecessary IP that has been, and trying to work out whether it has an effect or not, or whether it has any use at all. The whole thing can be a lot more clever, and picking out the pieces of IP that are really critical and not bothering with the rest of it, and making sure that people know what's what, and that requires not just a couple of IP lawyers. It requires a lot of support from the system. And I think it should be part of the infrastructure, but it needs to be a lot of resource that goes into it to make sure it's done really cleverly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good challenge for us all. I'm going to throw open questions to the floor. I think that we have some roving mics. It's a little bit dark. I'm hoping I'm going to be... Oh, they're fantastic.
Let there be light.
As if by magic.
Thank you. Just touching on the last points, there is a cultural problem with academics in protecting and also in driving forward the commercial entities, for sure. But isn't there a cultural problem in tech transfer and business development in universities as well, to sort of come to the academics saying, I understand that not sharing this will be a problem. If I push you to IP, I will be following you very closely so you can work with me, and I don't meet you once every 2 months. I meet you regularly, and we bring this together forward. So in my experience, the spin-off model is very difficult. It needs to be really driven forward by the academic himself. And I think BRC and MedCity and the Catapult, who have a completely different perspective, maybe could help teaching the tech transfer in universities that this is now more and more a viable option.
Should I touch on that?
Please.
I'm not going to go near the TTO question too closely, but the thing that I would say, in our experience, this is, the kind of work that these guys do is incredibly sophisticated and incredibly detailed and incredibly focused. And to ask a tech transfer office of a handful of people to have the body of knowledge that's necessary to work out what's a good patentable invention and what isn't is a very, very big ask. And I think there probably needs to be some thought about how things are structured across research as a whole. In cell and gene therapy, what we've said is actually we have that depth. We have 160 people who are, well, soon to be 200 people who are completely obsessed with all aspects and dynamics of cell and gene therapy. We have an IP group, and we have offered it out to the universities and said, to the tech transfer officers, and said, you might see things where somebody comes along to you and says, this is something that might be of interest. All right? If you can't see it, okay, send it to us and we'll take a look at it and we'll work with you. And that has happened. And that has resulted in company formations. So there is something in our space that can help that, and we're very keen to help. It won't always result in a patent, I can assure you of that, but it's a better chance.
I would also say, as an advert for the great translational research office at UCL, that some of the centres in the Golden Triangle who have a lot of activity in this area have very experienced teams who have developed over the years alongside us as they've grown up with the academics and the research programs, actually quite sophisticated understanding of this particular space. So I think there is expertise there. There probably aren't enough people there to do it, but I think there are concentrations of expertise.
I'd agree with that. Ludovic.
So, no, and for us, the IP is not the major issue, because we have a culture each time that we have a paper. Basically, we work with our TTO to see if it's acceptable or not in terms of patenting. It's very straightforward. There's never block any paper in my lab to patent anything, to publish anything. So it's not a big deal. I think the problem came more when we can't convince them that what we are doing is can be basically a product at the end. And that's where the biggest challenge is to convince the TTO, which are inundated by similar demand, to be able to evaluate the potential of a new technology, especially when it's a cutting edge technology. And that's where also the academic are struggling, because basically, and that's you need to basically demonstrate that what you are doing have a potential commercial application, which we're not very good at that, because that's basically not our job, because you need to be able to convince a pharma, to look at your patent and say that, yeah, we may be interested to buy a license, or found a biotech that will invest in that. So it's very, very complicated to do that. And I think that's where we may have some IP, some technology that, unfortunately, are not properly patented, because we not be able to find this commercial exit that is absolutely essential. But I think that's where you in a way, academic need to work with a TTO and be embedded in network of pharma, biotech, and so on, to be able to demonstrate that there is an interest in what they do.
Okay. I think we had another one there, and then one over here, please.
I have one observation and a related question. The monoclonal antibody analogy that you used, Matthew, I think there's one key difference here, and that is that those products, the biologics, are going into chronic conditions in a highly prevalent patient population. And there are a few, and we hope they will come through, like Parkinson's, but most advanced cell therapies are for a more focused population. So the way in which industry embraced the biologics might not quite reflect. But also you said about that the model needs to change, and I think Big Pharma has acknowledged that. But I'm not sure that the mindset has changed. And so my question to the panel is, can we use advanced therapies to maybe drive that change in mindset, so that rather than the sort of bury the head in the sand GSK attitude, we get more of a Novartis or a Gilead attitude, which is we want to embrace this either through acquisition or through supporting partner companies?
I would reflect a little bit on your comment about monoclonal antibodies, and then a little bit about Big Pharma attitude. First of all, on the monoclonal antibodies, I'm old enough, unfortunately, to remember when monoclonal antibodies were starting. They started in niche indications, graft versus host, that sort of thing, because there is a natural marriage, if you like, between pioneering technologies and rare diseases, from my personal experience, because you're looking to try things in very high unmet need, specific disease areas. And then it grew, and I see no reason why advanced therapies don't go through the same journey. It starts with relapsed refractory cancer, rare genetic disorders, and so on. But I certainly would expect that advanced therapies will then go into bigger cancers, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. These are huge indications, and I don't see why it shouldn't. So I think that journey is to come. But secondly, about changing Big Pharma attitudes, that's a hard thing to do in my experience. But what I would reflect, again, is that the thing that gets most people sitting up in those organizations, and again, this isn't meant to sound disparaging, is money and commercial opportunity. And I think the reason why they have yet to fully engage is that the money to date has been low. But I think that's changing, and I think you're seeing the valuations of companies, but you're also seeing real products coming onto the market with real prospects of making significant money. So I think that's where, I don't know this, but I suspect this, that there are many executives in large pharma companies who are getting a nudge from their senior executives saying, we need to get on this train, because if not, we're going to miss. And because I think it's that commercial reward that will drive that change of attitude.
Okay, I would also, guys,
please
to that. I mean, we shouldn't leave here believing that the large pharma industry hasn't got a role in the development of this industry. They're clearly embroiled in it. They're right in the middle of it. Going back to Emily, my first slide, Emily's case and two others resulted in Novartis pumping $50 million into UPenn, another $50 million into their own activity, and $50 million into buying a manufacturing facility, and then spending God knows how much more after that on driving the development forwards. They can get in there. I mean, they in some ways kicked off the CAR-T industry off, and they did it off the back of data from 3 patients. So they can also have the vision too. And I wouldn't necessarily say, GSK, they may have decided to move out of some of their operations. I'm not sure that Strimvelis would have got as far as it did without the commitment from GSK to push things forwards and the money behind it. It was certainly a bigger task than I think an SME at the time would have been able to take on by itself, certainly. And GSK are pushing forward in other areas of gene therapy as well, and cell therapy for that matter. So there is a role for these companies, and they are involved with it. Certainly my comments are alluding to the fact that I think the excitement and the nimbleness of an SME is more personally suited to my character.
I think we had another question down here, please. Was it?
Thank you. I'm Brendan Noble from the UK Stem Cell Foundation. And I wanted to go back to the drivers for academics in terms of protecting intellectual property and commercializing in general. And I wanted to pick up on the point and say I absolutely agree that the REF is such a big driver, both at an institutional level, but also at an individual level. And it doesn't really favor in the way that we probably require some of these activities. And the second thing that I was just thinking about as you were speaking was that, in fact, when you go for a grant, you bid for money to go to conferences, for publications. Do you ever have a category, or rarely have a category, that says intellectual property capture? And I wonder whether there's a new bit of thinking for us as funders across the board and what you thought of that.
So can I just interject for one moment to say that for those of you who may not be familiar with the acronym of the REF, it is the Research Excellence Framework, and it is the mechanism that has been introduced into academic institutions to assess the economic impact and the translational capacity and delivery across all academic disciplines. So it's not just life sciences focused. And for many of the people sitting here and for many of you in the audience, it's a very big deal. But that's what the REF is. So who would like to make some comments about that? Emma.
Okay, so I think one thing to say is there is a spectrum. So there are some grants you would apply for where you get funding for, as you say, conferences, etc. You get awarded the grant on the quality of the science, quality of the team, and the quality of your most recent publications in the field. Full stop. That's your basic academic research grant. I sit on one of the MRC boards. I'm on the infection and immunity panel. We see huge numbers of grants every year and have to make very difficult decisions in terms of funding highly competitive academic research. There are the MRC, the Wellcome, CRUK, and many disease-specific research funding charities will have other programs that are further along the translational pathway, as do NIHR. For example, the MRC DPFS Awards or the DCS Awards. And those actually are more translational, often involve clinical trials, and they will have quite extensive sections about IP in those applications. So I think it depends a bit which bit of the pathway you're looking at. Still, the very basic science applications have very minimal data that you have to put in about IP. In fact, some of them don't have any sections at all. They all ask about impact, pathways to impact, delivery, etc., but the IP hasn't snuck in there, and I think it will have to. Because, of course, the universities, it's a tough time financially, and senior management teams at big universities are having to rely on inward investment from industry, from UK PLC, Pharma, biotech, as well as research grants. help fund ongoing academic research activity in the universities. So it's become much more of a mainstream activity for a university. We're expected to commercialise our research, and the universities want to benefit from that financially. So it hasn't, I don't think it's quite all joined up yet. I don't know whether anyone would disagree with that.
No.
Have we got one final question?
Thank you. It's Ian McCubbin. I'm an independent. A number of the panel have talked about joining up the super science that we have in the UK all the way through the chain to commercialisation and uptake. Is the UK doing enough? And if not, what else should we be doing?
$1 million question.
Never enough.
Never enough.
Never enough.
Yeah. Well, is it doing enough? I think it's certain universities probably are more forward-thinking than others as far as this is concerned. But I actually think it's there's a lot more that can be done. There are fantastic ideas, but I think it does. It needs input at lots of different completely along that pathway. So one is we've already talked about early stages of discovery, protection of IP. That's one aspect where more expertise could help. Taking those studies then through into translational studies of safety and efficacy in mouse models, etc. That kind of work is hugely expensive. And to fund that, there are schemes such as the MRC and the DPFS schemes and some of the Wellcome schemes. But again, it's very highly competitive. And now, as this field is increasing, then very good projects are not being funded because there just isn't enough money to go around. So if we're really serious about getting this through for more projects, of course the quality has to be good, but even high quality projects are now being rejected just because the funding isn't available, then we have to put more money into those kind of schemes. We also have to, at the stage where these are ready for commercialization or for commercialization interest, there just needs to be a more nimble way of doing it. And again, some universities are probably quite proactive, and others don't have that infrastructure in place. So it's, I think it is being done. We've talked about how great we are, within this golden triangle of being able to do that. But, it's a very, very competitive world out there. And I personally, I don't think we're fast enough. I don't think our universities are really, we talk a good game. We're not absolutely ready and have put the infrastructure enough to make that happen at the speed with which it does need to happen. And then there's a whole piece about what happens afterwards. And is the UK, ready to allow these kind of companies to really flourish within the UK, or are they really going to go, much faster in the US? So I think there's a lot of, right from the early stages through to later stage, we can do better. I think we have to do better, or we will lose this fantastic science that we're doing and that has enormous potential, and it will go elsewhere.
Ludovic.
Yeah. So I think that's really important to underline that the UK is doing extremely well, and that's because it's a very, very unique, strong base of basic science, and that's what allowed the innovation to go through. I mean, if you look in my field of stem cells, it's obvious that basic science have underpinned all the success of UK in this era. And that need to be sustained in the long term and need a continued investment. But UK, and I have the chance to be able to compare UK to other countries like France or Germany, and is doing extremely well in Europe. After, if you want to compete against US, I think it's a question of resource and money. And that's clearly where the UK and Europe in general now, to have an investment of £200 million in a company, it's incredibly difficult. In the US, that's will be something that is almost average.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's going, it's a massive roadblock, because basically you can't push those innovation at a level where they can go very quick and impact a market very fast. And that's probably one of the missing links that need to be solved to really fully benefit from the UK capacity of innovation.
Matthew.
So from my perspective, having spent quite a lot of time discussing the sort of relationship between the infrastructure and the resources that Catapult has and the development of the industry. I think that from a translational point of view, there's a lot of good infrastructure in place. And it's probably in balance with what's there at the moment. I think the UK could be a lot more disciplined about choosing where some of the existing money is spent. But what I really would like to see is, if you look at the basic research and the feedstock for the growth of this industry, it's patchy in terms of the amount of investment that goes in. There's some really exciting areas around gene therapy, but those have come out of 20 years of research. There's whole areas of this industry that we're really not getting into. So the IPS activity, the IPS cells and stuff like that, some of the treatments for chronic conditions, I think there's a lot more that can be done in terms of investment at the research stage, which will yield over the coming decades. And we need to make that investment. We need to make more of it if we're going to be internationally competitive.
I don't want to finish on a downer, but when we look beyond the excellent academic basis that we have, if we could provide some level of certainty about our future relationship with the world and how we're going to interact with EMA, how we're going to interact with our trading partners, I think that would help everybody, I would suggest. Sorry.
we nearly got through with that.
Yeah, I was going to say, that sounds like a good point to wrap up. We almost managed, as you say, probably to get through without the spectre of appearing. Can I say a huge thank you to the panel